I lay there in the sterile, white room, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor a constant reminder of the new life I had just brought into the world. My body ached, but it was a good kind of ache, one I had expected, one that came with the birth of a child. I could feel the weight of the baby on my chest, the soft, warm bundle of joy that had changed everything. But amidst the overwhelming joy, something else lingered in the air, something I couldn't shake off. Daniel was beside me, but he felt miles away. His hand was there, gripping mine, but it wasn't the same. There was no connection in the way he held me, no warmth, no comfort. Just a distant, almost mechanical touch. He hadn't said much since the baby was born. I tried to focus on the miracle in my arms, to distract myself from the creeping unease in my chest. James. I had thought it would be sweet. I had genuinely believed it would be a beautiful gesture to let him hold our baby first. After all, he was once such a huge part of my life. We'd been young, in love, naive, maybe, but I'd loved him with a kind of passion I hadn't known since. We had broken up amicably, or so I thought, and then life moved on. Daniel and I had met, fallen in love, and started a life together. But James had always remained a shadow in my past. He was the one who had always been there, even if from a distance, and when the pregnancy had come, I thought it would be symbolic, thought it would be the right thing to do. Let him hold the baby first, as if to close the chapter on that part of my life. I watched as James, standing on the opposite side of the room, cradled the baby in his arms. His eyes were full of wonder and tenderness, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel that old comfort in his presence. It felt almost natural to see him there, holding the child, and I almost felt like everything had come full circle. This was how it was supposed to be. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Daniel shift uncomfortably. His face was unreadable, but the tightness in his jaw said enough. I didn't think much of it at first. James had just left the room, handing the baby back to me, and for a brief moment, I saw Daniel's eyes soften. He smiled at me, a small, strained smile, and kissed my forehead. But something was off. The lightness that should have been there was missing. That night, I sat up in bed, trying to get some sleep while the baby rested peacefully in the bassinet beside me. Daniel hadn't said much all evening. He had been distant, quiet. I reached for him, my hand resting on his shoulder. He stiffened under my touch. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sighed, sitting up. His back was turned to me, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his words clipped. "I don't know, Emma. I don't know." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart starting to race. He turned around to face me then, his eyes tired and clouded with frustration. "I thought we were starting a family. I thought this was supposed to be our moment. But you let him, James, hold the baby first. And I can't get past that." I blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. "Daniel, I know," he interrupted, shaking his head. "I get it. He's your ex. He's been a part of your life, I understand that. But this is our child, Emma. Our child." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion he was trying so hard to suppress. "It just feels like I'm not even part of this. Like you're still holding on to him. Like I don't matter." The word stung, more than I cared to admit. "That's not fair," I whispered, my eyes welling up. "You matter. You're my husband. This is our family now. James is part of my past. That's it. I don't feel that way, he said bitterly, pushing himself out of bed and pacing to the other side of the room. I can't do this. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when I feel like I'm being replaced. Or worse, like I don't even exist in this picture. I sat there, stunned. The room felt smaller, suffocating. I had thought I was doing something kind, something that would bridge the gap between past and present. But now, it seemed like I had opened a door I couldn't close, and the consequences were unfolding right before me. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he grabbed his jacket, and in a swift movement, he was gone. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me in a stunned silence. My heart raced as I sat there, the reality of the situation settling in. I had just made a mistake, one that I didn't know how to fix. I had thought it would be a nice gesture, something innocent, but I hadn't seen the cracks that were already forming in our relationship. And now, I was alone. The baby cooed softly from the bassinet, and I reached for them, my hands trembling. I held the tiny, fragile life close to my chest, but the weight of what had just happened felt too much to bear. What had I done? How could I have misjudged everything so badly? I glanced at the empty doorway where Daniel had just stood. What would happen now? How would I ever make this right? The silence in the room was suffocating. I sat there, cradling the baby, watching the door as if willing Daniel to walk back through it. But he didn't. The hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last, and still, he didn't return. I couldn't blame him. I knew I had messed up. I had made a decision without thinking about how it would affect him, and now, I was paying the price. The baby's soft cooing pulled me back to the present, and I blinked away the tears that had started to form in my eyes. I needed to focus. I needed to be strong. But how could I be strong when everything felt like it was falling apart around me? I glanced at my phone. No messages from Daniel. No calls. He hadn't even tried to reach out. It was as if he had completely shut me out. And I couldn't blame him for that either. I had never seen him like this, so angry, so hurt. I thought we were stronger than this. I thought we could get through anything together. But now, I was questioning everything. Had I misjudged him all along? Had I underestimated how fragile our relationship really was? I stood up carefully, trying not to disturb the baby, and walked to the window. Outside, the night was still. The world seemed calm, untouched by the storm that was brewing inside me. I could hear the distant sounds of the city, cars, faint voices, the hum of life going on without me. I envied that. I turned back to the room, my eyes falling on the empty spot where Daniel had been only hours ago. I could still see him in my mind, pacing around the room, his eyes filled with a kind of sadness I couldn't reach. He hadn't said much before he left, but the hurt in his voice was enough. He had felt replaced. He had felt like I chose my past over him. And maybe, in some way, I had. Maybe I had been too focused on trying to appease old wounds, forgetting that I was married now. Forgetting that this new life we were building together should have been my priority. I heard a soft knock on the door, and my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, whether it was Daniel, coming back to apologize, or just a nurse with a new round of medications for me. But when I opened the door, it wasn't either of those things. It was my mother. She stood there, her expression concerned but not surprised. She had seen the tension between Daniel and me before. She had always been a bit too perceptive, reading between the lines of every conversation, every interaction. And I knew, even before she spoke, that she had already figured out what had happened. Emma, she said softly, stepping into the room and wrapping her arms around me. I let myself collapse into her embrace, letting the tears I had been holding back finally spill over. I'm so sorry. I shook my head, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I messed up, Mom. I thought it would be okay. I thought it would be something nice, but I didn't think it through. I know you didn't, she said, pulling away slightly to look at me. But I also know that you never intended for this to happen. You were trying to do something kind. But sometimes, Emma, we don't see the consequences of our actions until it's too late. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I don't know what to do, Mom. I don't know how to fix this. Daniel hasn't answered any of my calls. He won't even talk to me. You need to give him some time, she said gently, sitting down on the chair beside the bed. He's hurt, Emma. And sometimes, when people are hurt, they need space. But that doesn't mean it's over. It just means he's processing everything. But what if it is over? I whispered. What if I've ruined everything? She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes soft but firm. You haven't ruined anything, sweetheart. You just need to figure out how to rebuild. And that starts with being honest with yourself about what's important. You can't keep holding on to the past and expect your future to move forward. Daniel needs to feel like he's your priority, not just a second thought. I let her words sink in, feeling a pang in my chest. She was right, of course. I had been trying to keep everything in balance, but I had failed to see that the balance had already tipped. Daniel needed to feel valued, needed to know that he was the one I had chosen to build a life with. But by letting James hold the baby first, by giving him that moment of connection, I had unintentionally sent the message that I wasn't fully invested in my marriage. That I was still living in the past. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked down at the screen, hoping for a message from Daniel, but instead, it was from James. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what kind of conversation I was willing to have with him right now. But I knew I had to at least read it. I hope everything is okay. I didn't mean to cause any problems. Please let me know if you need anything. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keys. I had no idea what to say. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that I had made a mistake, but I also didn't know how to express that without causing even more tension between him and Daniel. The last thing I needed right now was to make things more complicated. I don't know what to do, I murmured, showing the message to my mother. She read it, then looked back at me. James is a part of your past, Emma. He's always been there, but that doesn't mean he should be a part of your present right now. If you want to fix things with Daniel, you need to focus on him. And you need to give him the time he needs to heal. I nodded, though a part of me resisted. I couldn't just cut ties with James, not when he had been such an integral part of my life for so long. But I understood what my mother was saying. I needed to focus on my marriage, on the family I was building now. That had to be my priority. I sent a quick reply to James, telling him that everything was fine and thanking him for his concern. Then, I set the phone down, trying to gather the strength to call Daniel again. This time, I needed to find the words to make him understand. I needed to tell him that I was sorry, that I would do whatever it took to make this right. But as I picked up the phone, the fear of rejection stopped me cold. What if he didn't want to talk to me? What if it was already too late? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had to try. For us. For the life we were supposed to build together. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. The baby slept soundly in the bassinet beside me, their little chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos inside my mind. I had hardly slept. The thoughts that had consumed me the night before had followed me into the morning, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I had no idea how I was supposed to fix this. Daniel was still gone. I had waited all night for him to come back, but he never did. I had called, I had texted, and nothing. The silence between us was so thick that it felt like it had become a wall, a barrier I wasn't sure how to break down. Every time I thought about calling again, the fear of rejection stopped me cold. What if he didn't want to hear from me? What if he had already made up his mind? I had never seen him like this, so distant, so cold. I reached for my phone again, my fingers trembling slightly as I unlocked it. There were still no messages from him. I thought about calling his mother, or maybe even my own mother, but what would I say? "Hi, it's Emma. Can you help me fix my marriage?" It wasn't that simple. It never was. My phone buzzed, and I jumped, heart pounding. I picked it up quickly, half expecting it to be Daniel, but when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was James. I had sent him a message yesterday, thanking him for his concern, but I hadn't expected him to reply. Not now, not after everything that had happened. I just spoke with Daniel. He's really upset. He doesn't want to talk to me about it, but he's hurting. I think you need to talk to him. You need to fix this before it's too late. I stared at the message, the words ringing in my ears. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. James had spoken to Daniel? What had they said? I didn't know if I could handle hearing what was going on in Daniel's mind, but maybe I didn't have a choice. Maybe this was the sign I had been waiting for. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. I had to call him. I had to face this. I couldn't hide behind texts or messages anymore. I needed to speak to him, to tell him how sorry I was. I needed him to hear me. But as I dialed his number, the doubt crept in again. What if he didn't want to hear me? What if he had already made his decision? The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, before it went to voicemail. "Daniel, please pick up," I whispered to myself, my heart racing. "Please." But the voicemail beeped, and I felt like my world was crashing down around me. I could hear the sound of my own voice in my ears, shaky and fragile. "Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know I've messed up. I know I hurt you, and I am so sorry. You mean everything to me. This wasn't supposed to happen. I never wanted to make you feel like you were second, like you didn't matter. You're the one I chose, Daniel. You're the one I want to build my life with. Please, just come home. I'll be here, waiting. Just, please, let's talk." I hung up, feeling hollow, like I had just bared my soul to an empty room. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, as if willing it to ring, willing him to call back. But the silence was deafening. The only sound was the soft, steady breathing of the baby, and it was almost too much to bear. Hours passed. I had no idea how many. Time seemed to stretch on forever as I waited for any sign of life from Daniel. But the phone remained silent. My thoughts spun in endless circles. What if this was it? What if everything I had worked for, everything I had built with Daniel, was falling apart? What if I had ruined everything beyond repair? I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't fix it by myself. And for the first time, I realized just how fragile everything really was. I had been so caught up in trying to please everyone else, and trying to hold on to the past while moving forward into the future, that I had almost forgotten to prioritize the one person who mattered most, Daniel. The door to the room creaked open, and I looked up, startled. My heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't Daniel. It was my mother. She stepped inside, concern etched into her face. "Have you heard from him yet?" she asked softly. I shook my head, the weight of everything pressing down on me. No. He hasn't called, hasn't texted. I don't know what to do anymore. My mother sat down beside me, her hand resting gently on my arm. "Emma, listen to me. You've done everything you can. You've apologized. Now it's up to him. I know this isn't easy, but sometimes, people need time. Daniel is hurt. You have to give him space to process everything, even if it feels like he's pushing you away." I nodded, but inside, the fear gnawed at me. What if this was it? What if the space he needed turned into a distance he couldn't cross? What if I had already lost him? "You can't fix everything right now," my mother continued. "But that doesn't mean it's over. You have to trust that you've done what you can. The rest is up to him." I stared at the baby in the bassinet, my heart heavy. My life had changed in so many ways in such a short time, and yet, I felt more uncertain than ever. I had tried so hard to do the right thing, to be the right wife, the right mother, but nothing felt right anymore. I had made a mistake. A big one. And now, I didn't know how to fix it. The doorbell rang. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't sure if I could handle it, if it was just another empty delivery or another person offering condolences. But my mother stood up and moved toward the door. When she opened it, my heart nearly stopped. There, standing on the threshold, was Daniel. He looked tired, worn, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red, and his expression was unreadable, but I could see the hurt beneath it. The moment our eyes met, I felt a rush of relief, mixed with a deep sense of fear. I didn't know what he was going to say, but I knew that whatever happened next would determine everything. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I nodded, tears springing to my eyes as I stood up. "Yes," I whispered. "Please. Let's talk." As he stepped inside, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't the end. Not yet. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in days, I believed there was a chance to rebuild. And that was enough for now.